Manhattan glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Eclipse Tech's high-rise boardroom. But inside, the air was sharp enough to cut. The long mahogany table gleamed under harsh lights, reflecting power, not warmth. At the head, Victor Kincaid, freshly appointed CEO, rested one manicured hand on a leather folder. The sound came first, not a gavel, not applause, just the brutal snap of the folder slamming shut. Effective immediately, his voice smooth and steel-edged. Brielle Thompson, Chief Systems Engineer, is terminated. Silence. Thick. Absolute. Charts froze mid-slide. Pens hovered above notepads, never landing. A dozen directors sat rigid, their eyes turning me into a specimen under scrutiny. 6 years of late nights. Missed birthdays. Endless code reviews. Erased in a single sentence. Victor didn't flinch. His gaze slid past me, as if I were already a ghost. To him, I wasn't the woman who had carried the weight of this company, who had mentored a team of brilliant black engineers, people who trusted me to guide them. I was just an obstacle. Heat flared behind my ears, spreading down my neck like wildfire. Every nerve screamed to stand, to shout, to throw the truth in their polished faces. I built this. Every line of code, every system that kept Eclipse Tech alive. But I didn't, not yet. I gathered my notes with deliberate calm, stacking each page like armor. Sliding my pen into my jacket pocket, I rose slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting them taste their own discomfort. Then, I lifted my chin, my voice, quiet and steady, cut through the stillness. Thank you. Confusion rippled across the table. A few directors shifted in their seats, glancing at one another. One woman flinched, as if my words were a stone tossed into still water. Victor blinked once. That was all. He leaned back, smoothed his cufflinks, and moved on to the next agenda item as though I had never existed. But they didn't know, not yet. They didn't know what I had hidden, what I had prepared for. They thought they were witnessing a dismissal. They didn't realize they were witnessing the first fracture in their empire. As I stepped out of the boardroom, the silence followed me like a shadow. Manhattan's skyline sparkled with ambition. But inside me, a storm was just beginning. In the parking garage, I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked foreign, hollow eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. Years of sacrifice, nights in a cramped Brooklyn garage, coding through outages, bartering contracts at 3 a.m., all of it condensed into a single moment of erasure. Victor Kincaid never carried that weight. His resume was polished marble. Consulting firms, corner offices, buzzwords, words that never debugged a line of code, never put food on an engineer's table. And yet he stood there, judge and executioner. But beneath the sting was clarity. Yes, Victor had the title. Yes, the boardroom had applauded my supposed downfall. But they didn't understand the blueprint I had drawn. The contracts buried with clauses no one else noticed. The nights I had secured the company's survival when budgets collapsed. They thought they'd erased me. They hadn't, not yet. They thought they erased me. They thought a single sentence, a signature on a folder, could render me obsolete. But my years of sacrifice hadn't vanished. They had calcified into leverage, into something Victor Kincaid would never see coming. Something he would never even dream existed beneath the glossed-over surface of spreadsheets and PR slides. I sat there in the dim garage, the world above humming with Manhattan's relentless rhythm, horns blaring, sirens weaving a citywide symphony. Yet down here, in the shadows of cracked concrete and the lingering scent of burnt circuits, I felt almost invisible. For a flicker of a moment, doubt whispered, maybe they're right. Maybe I am finished. But no. The truth crystallized like ice in my veins. I had prepared for this. Long before Victor's smug smile. Long before the boardroom applause. I had laid the groundwork. Tucked away contingencies. Built secret corridors into systems only I could navigate. And what he thought was my execution might just be the opening move. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, it was silence. An empty Slack channel where once there had been noise. Inside jokes, threads that stretched past midnight. Then, one by one, The messages appeared. Maya. Do we even still have repo access? Caleb. HR says all commits are frozen until new leadership signs off. Ethan. Guess we're disposable after all. Each notification landed like a weight against my chest. These weren't just colleagues. They were my family in code. The brightest engineers I had ever worked with. People who had built something out of nothing. Who stayed through outages. Who sacrificed birthdays and holidays for deadlines that barely paid off. And now, they sounded like soldiers abandoned mid-battle, unsure if their weapons even worked anymore. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering but not typing. What could I say? That I was sorry? That I hadn't fought harder in that boardroom? My silence there had been strategic, a refusal to beg, a refusal to give Victor the satisfaction. But to my team, did it look like surrender? The guilt pressed in. I had always been the anchor, the one who steadied the storm. And now they were drifting. Untethered. Had I failed them? For the first time in years, doubt clawed its way in. Maybe Victor was right. Maybe leadership was just about titles. About smiles and connections and corner offices. Maybe my work, my nights coding in server rooms that smelled of dust and burnt circuits, meant nothing at all. I poured another coffee, bitter and stale, and sat staring at the glow of my laptop. My reflection stared back in the dark glass. Tired and worn, eyes rimmed with fatigue but burning with a quiet defiance. Then, at 3:04 p.m., a new message lit up my phone. From Liam. Liam, the intern, barely 21, always carrying a notebook filled with sketches and half-formed algorithms. He wasn't supposed to be in the loop beyond QA protocols. His text was only 7 words. They don't know who really owns it. I froze. My heart kicked against my ribs. Of all people, it was Liam who glimpsed the truth. The board didn't know. Victor didn't know. No one in that boardroom realized that during the chaos of budget cuts 2 years ago, I had tucked away the modular system's original licensing rights under a separate entity. A safety net. My safety net. And with one casual text, Liam had reminded me. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't finished. The emptiness didn't vanish, but beneath the fatigue, a spark caught flame. Plans long buried started to stir. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The rain started as a whisper against the window, then grew into a steady percussion. 1,000 tiny fists drumming against the glass. The city beyond my Oakland apartment blurred through the streaked windowpane, a reminder of how far I'd come, and how far I could still go. I sat alone in my studio apartment, a place that smelled faintly of damp carpet, old takeout, and ink from scribbled contracts. The kitchen table looked less like a place to eat and more like a battlefield. Contracts stacked in leaning towers. Binders split open, notes scrawled on sticky pads curling at the edges. Coffee stains bled into paper like old wounds. Above me, the cheap lamp flickered, casting shadows that twitched across the walls. For a moment, I imagined the scene across the bay. Victor Kincaid in his glass-walled penthouse, sipping top-shelf whiskey, rehearsing his next line for investors. He had the skyline, the cocktails, the curated power poses. I had peeling paint, a dripping faucet, and a mind that could outmaneuver him at every turn. The contrast would have been funny if it didn't sting so much. My phone buzzed again. Another anxious message from Maya. From Caleb. From Ethan. I didn't answer. What could I possibly say? I wasn't their leader anymore. I wasn't anyone's leader. But deep inside, something else stirred. The anchor hadn't broken. It was ready to hold fast. Ready to steer the storm back in our direction. And I would. The silence pressed down on me. Heavy and suffocating. Like the weight of every late night. Every missed dinner. Every personal compromise I'd made for Apex Nova. For years I had poured everything into that company, my sleep, my weekends, my blood and sweat, watching it grow from a garage in Brooklyn to a glass tower in Manhattan. Nights coding through power outages. Mornings battling through budget meetings. Holidays sacrificed. Milestones skipped. I had traded pieces of myself for a company that discarded me in less than a minute. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was done. Maybe this was the end. I shoved another folder aside and almost laughed at the absurdity of it. All this paper. All these contracts. All this bureaucracy. What did it matter now? Everything I had built. The late-night strategies. The midnight calls. The system I had coded from scratch. Erased by a signature and a whisper in a boardroom. But then, buried beneath a stack of old quarterly reports, I found it, a yellowed envelope, edges soft and frayed from being handled too many times. My pulse quickened before I even opened it. I already knew what was inside. The budget cut email, 2 years old, the night I had stayed awake drafting an alternate plan while the rest of the company panicked. The night I had sewn a hidden safety net, a clause no one in the office had noticed. I unfolded the paper slowly, my hands trembling. Halfway down the page, the clause stared back at me. Quiet, unassuming, like a coiled snake waiting for its moment. In the event of project termination or leadership removal, all rights revert to the original architect until full reintegration. My breath caught. There it was, my clause, my safeguard, my silent revenge already inked in black and white. Victor thought firing me had stripped me of power. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his decision had triggered the very clause that returned everything to me. The platform, the licensing, the leverage. The room didn't change. It was still small, cluttered, lit by a flickering bulb that hummed like it was tired of bearing witness. But it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a command center. I wasn't just the fired architect sitting alone in a damp apartment. I was the only one holding the keys. Resolve settled into my bones. Cold, sharp, unshakable. They thought I was erased. But tonight, in the rain whispering against my window, I knew better. This wasn't the end. This was the reset, the first move of a game only I knew how to play. The demo was supposed to be theater. Apex Nova had polished the stage, curated the slides, hired a presenter who could smile at hedge funds and make them feel like profits were in the room. The auditorium smelled of stale coffee, expensive cologne, and expectation. Investors in navy suits tapped watches, whispered, leaned forward. Reporters poised their pens like tiny spears, ready to pierce any sign of weakness. The lighting director had made the logo on the far wall shimmer like a promise. I was not there. I was 3 neighborhoods away, in a studio that smelled faintly of last night's takeout and damp carpet. Watching a live stream thread blow up in a private Slack channel I still had access to. My laptop fan clicked against the hum of the city. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. Outside, a night bus whispered past, headlights slicing through the darkness. Inside, 100 small notifications blinked red, little alarms of chaos I hadn't created but was about to exploit. At 9:03 a.m., the screen in the auditorium lit to white. And the demo began, smooth, cinematic, the user flows I had argued for finally translated into a glimmering prototype. Then a line of gray text crawled across the top. License authorization expired. It was a single sentence on a white screen. Nothing dramatic to the untrained eye. But the room heard it like a gunshot. You could feel the oxygen leave the demo. Camera shutters stuttered. Someone in the front row laughed. High and brittle, as if to fill the silence. Victor Kincaid's smile, so practiced, so ready for the cameras, stayed on for an extra beat. Then faltered. He reached for the microphone and the words stumbled out like reheated leftovers. Minor hiccup, he said, we'll get it back in. 20 seconds later, his voice foundered. The technical team hustled in suits and lanyards. Fingers flying across terminals. The CTO mouthed something at an engineer. Who tapped a terminal? Who tapped another? The auditorium became an operating theater where the patient refused to cooperate. Panic rose like smoke. Quiet at first, then thick, twisting, spreading through the polished room like wildfire. In my Slack channel, messages spooled like a rope pulled taut. Caleb. Ops can't push to staging. Keys invalid. Maya. We can't even access the sandbox. License check failing on C. Ethan. They built a demo that needs me to sign off. Lol. I let the messages roll by. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then rested. The old reflex, jump in. Fix. Smother the panic. Ward with something new. I didn't need to patch anything. Not yet. From the live stream, I watched Victor try to salvage. To perform. He told a joke. He waved a hand. He promised a fix. He shrugged and pointed to the engineering team as if they were magicians failing on stage. He circled the perimeter of the demo hall. Eyes bright to the cameras. Voice tight with sweat. A man teetering between confidence and collapse. And I, Brielle, smiled quietly in the shadows of my studio. I had built this world. And tonight, the world would remember whose hands had truly held it together. But the error replicated. What began as a single line of gray text metastasized into a chorus of alerts. Staging inaccessible. Vendor handshakes failing. Encrypted keys returning authorization denied. Across monitors worldwide, processes stalled. Financial dashboards that had once run like clockwork now blinked red. Each alert a heartbeat of panic. On Wall Street, algorithmic traders felt the ripple instantly. Tickers dipped. Headlines typed themselves before editors could even catch up. In the auditorium, an investor nudged his partner. And the partner's jaw tightened. Eyes narrowing with suspicion. Phones rang in chaotic rhythm. Calls were placed, muted, repeated. I didn't feel triumph the way a cartoon villain might. No gloating. No raised glass. What rose through me was colder. Sharper. Precise. Confirmation. The clause I had tucked away, my insurance, wasn't just ink on paper. It was a lock, a failsafe designed to make the system refuse any hand that hadn't been legally authorized to steer it. Every denial, every authorization required, was my signature echoing across the network, reminding them who truly controlled the code. The tech team fought the cascade. The harder they tried, the deeper the system locked. Error messages multiplied like rats fleeing a boarded hull. Authorization required. Signature invalid. Access denied. The same phrases I'd engineered to protect the platform from misuse now shielded it from the very people who had tried to erase me. Victor's face, always composed, shifted. The practiced veneer of calm fractured into raw calculation. He barked orders, nodded rapidly, tried to marshal control, but the investors in the room had already heard, failed, too many times. The confidence he'd sold with polished slides, pie charts promising domination, began to appear brittle, performative. Outside my Oakland window, the night had shifted. Traffic lights blinked impatiently. Sirens wailed distant and blue. On my screen, the auditorium's polished reality crumbled. The moderator attempted to hold the narrative together. "We've contained the issue," he said, but the narrative had already split. The camera cut to a wide shot of Victor under the Apex Nova logo. For a moment, the corner of his mouth twitched, a tremor of vulnerability. Under those lights, he looked very small. 1,000 micro-decisions unfolded in the next hour. Legal teams texting counsel. Investor relations drafting damage control statements. Partners pausing integrations mid-call. The demo meant to win trust had broadcast vulnerability instead. Panic danced in the polished room. Thick and suffocating. I felt the names of my team like a pulse in my chest. Maya. Caleb. Ethan. The ones who would take the heat for failures they hadn't caused. I thought of their late nights. Jokes over stale pizza. The way their eyes lit up when a tricky integration passed. My chest tightened. A mixture of sorrow and protectiveness. They had built with me. They had trusted me. And now they would survive because of the foundation I had quietly left behind. Then the seed of the next move settled with calm certainty. The first crack had widened into a fissure. It would not close itself. By mid-morning, Slack threads splintered between panic and opportunity. Reporters filed copy with relish reserved for scandal. Investors paused calls, whispered continuity plans to one another. The CEO's empire felt fragile, splintering under its own hubris. I leaned back, letting the weight of the city and its chaos seep into my mind. This was not failure. This was leverage. The authorization checks, the protections I had built to stop misuse, were now walls Victor could not breach. Without the legal chain linking the system to me, he had no control, none. Somewhere between flashing error messages and nervous laughter, a new reality took shape. They would have to ask the question they had ignored for years. They would be forced to examine contracts. Clauses left unread. They would confront the person behind them. When HR reached for their scripts. When the board scrambled to patch the wound. One call would matter above all. For now, the room emptied of bravado. Lights dimmed fractionally. The demo had taught them something unseeable until now. Systems obey rules. People do not. I closed my laptop, letting the hum of my apartment fill the pause. The first crack in their empire had opened. It would widen, and when it did, they would have to choose: beg me back, or watch the house fall. Either way, the next move would not be mine to suffer. It would be mine to execute. The morning after the demo collapse, the city felt different. I walked past a corner cafe, catching the headlines scrolling silently across a muted TV above the baristas. Apex Nova product launch in chaos. The anchor's lips moved, but I didn't need sound to know the story. My phone buzzed nonstop. Slack threads. Texts from former teammates. Reporters fishing for comment. Every vibration. Another tremor through the empire I had built line by line. Inside my apartment, however, there was stillness. Not triumphant. Not celebratory. A quiet, humming truth under my ribs. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't scream into the void. I simply sat at my chipped laminate kitchen table, the scent of last night's burnt coffee still lingering, and let the silence confirm it. The lock had worked. Victor could strut on stage all he wanted. Investors could draft angry memos. The system wasn't theirs anymore. It wasn't even Apex Nova's. It was mine. For the first time since the boardroom, I felt air expand fully into my lungs. Then, at 11:47 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. San Jose area code. I almost ignored it. I already knew. Jordan? Hi, this is Alexis from Human Resources. How are you holding up? Her voice was smooth honey. Professional yet warm. Just enough concern to mask control. I could almost hear her script rustling in her hand. Sympathetic. Supportive. Non-committal. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting over the stack of folders on my table. Contracts marked with yellow highlighter bled like battle scars. Testimony to every sleepless night. Every argument fought in boardrooms that smelled of power and cheap coffee. I'm fine, I said flatly, voice steady, hiding the fire that had begun to smolder. Oh, good, good, she rushed. Relief staged, rehearsed. Listen, the past few days have been challenging. But leadership has been talking. And we believe it would be mutually beneficial if you came back. You know, restore continuity. Bring stability to the team. Restore continuity. Mutually beneficial. The phrases clinked together like fragile, cheap glass, pretending weight where there was none. She pressed on. Faster now. Cracks showing in the polished veneer. We'd be happy to revisit your compensation. Make adjustments. Substantial ones. This is about recognizing your value. Brielle. Recognizing my value. The same value they'd tossed aside in front of an entire boardroom like it was dead weight. Like it had no heartbeat. I let the silence stretch. A slow, deliberate stretch meant to make her squirm. Then, I said it, each word slow, precise, a hammer hitting a metal wall. You don't have enough money. Her breath caught. I'm sorry? You don't have enough money to buy back the years. The birthdays I missed. The hospital bills I carried while building the system you didn't even understand. You don't have enough to buy back the truth. On the other end, silence stretched tight. No manual could have prepared her for this. No script for the fire I carried. Just a pause, and the hum of my own heartbeat filling the line. I ended the call before she could recover. Hand steady, chest calm. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was defining the terms. Power, I realized, didn't live in corner offices, in glass boardrooms, or in the applause of investors. Power was refusing to be bought, refusing to be cheapened. That night, as I shut off the lights, a new thought circled my mind like a hawk. If Apex Nova was desperate enough to crawl back within 24 hours, who else was watching? The fissure had grown. Once cracks appear, the world notices. And then, precisely at 12:19 a.m., my inbox chimed. Subject line: invitation to talk. No logos, no corporate fireworks, just a signature at the bottom. Chris Dalton. Ardent Dynamics. Chris Dalton, a name I hadn't heard in years. Once, he had been one of ours, a sharp mind. Tongue sharper. Until Victor tossed him aside during a restructuring, calling him unmanageable. Chris had walked out laughing, spitting one last line. Marcus wouldn't recognize innovation if it bit him. And now he was back. By the time I agreed to meet, the city pulsed with morning traffic, its rhythm vibrating through cracked sidewalks and neon signage. We met at a cafe on the edge of downtown, neutral ground. Espresso burned the air. Baristas moved without hurry. Conversations blended into a muted hum that shielded our talk. Chris slid into the booth across from me, half smirk intact. Older now, lines etched at the corners of his eyes. But the grin carried the same amusement and challenge it always had. Brielle West, he said, savoring the novelty. Didn't think I'd see the day you'd be on the outside looking in. Life surprises, I said evenly, tone unshaken. He chuckled, stirring his coffee without sugar. Victor always had a talent for driving out the ones who actually mattered. First me, now you. Difference is, you built a hell of a lot more before he shoved you aside. I kept my expression still, though the words hit heavier than I expected. You didn't ask me here to reminisce. You're right. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low enough to be drowned by the hiss of the milk steamer. Ardent wants what you built. We've watched the fallout. Investors whisper, clients doubt, but you and I both know the system doesn't move without you. My pulse quickened, but I forced my eyes not to flicker. What makes you so sure? That grin sharpened, and he slid a tablet across the table. On the screen glowed a document I knew all too well, the licensing agreement. My licensing agreement, highlighted in yellow. Clause 7.2.1. The oversight clause, my clause. Chris tapped the screen with one finger. Marcus doesn't know, does he? That you're the only one who can actually turn the key. Without you, the whole platform is just an empty shell. For a long moment, the cafe dissolved around us. The clink of cups, the hiss of steam, even the low jazz spilling from the speakers above, muted. Irrelevant, his words hung between us. Heavy, deliberate, vibrating like the hum of power lines under tension. Chris leaned back, satisfaction barely contained in his posture. So the question isn't whether the system works. It's whether you want it to work for them, or for someone else. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug, grounding myself in its heat. The bitter edge of espresso stung my tongue, masking the storm coiling in my chest. Caution tightened around me like steel wire. Rivals don't extend hands out of kindness. They extend them for leverage. For profit, for control. And yet, beneath the caution, curiosity flickered. For the first time since the boardroom, someone outside Apex Nova had spoken the truth aloud. And that truth carried weight. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. Long enough for Chris to think I was unmoved. Unshakable. But inside, something had shifted. Small and fierce. A pivot point. When I finally rose to leave, Chris only grinned wider, as if the seed he came to plant had already taken root. Stepping into the sharp morning light of downtown, the city's noise surged back over me, horns, footsteps, conversations, but his words trailed like smoke, lingering, teasing. If you're the only one who can turn the key, who will you turn it for? The headlines hit like confetti on the next broadcast. Apex Nova restores stability. CEO Victor Hale praised for swift action. There he was, center stage, standing behind a polished podium under blinding lights. Tie the color of midnight. Smile perfectly rehearsed. Cameras clicked. Microphones angled. Victor spoke with the ease of a man who had never written a single line of code but had mastered performance. Optics. Control. Minor turbulence. He called, booming, his voice smooth as polished stone. Thanks to the tireless efforts of our DevOps team, the system is fully restored. Apex Nova is stronger than ever. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then swelling. Directors breathed easier. Investors unclenched their fists. Employees clung to hope. Flashbulbs ignited, painting the auditorium in bursts of sterile white. But I knew better. At my apartment, I watched the live stream on a second-hand laptop balanced on a scarred table. Victor's practiced grin, the board's relieved nods, The crowd's forced smiles, it all flickered across my screen. And beneath it all, I could see the hollowness. The illusion. A system doesn't heal itself by ignoring contracts. Licenses don't rewrite themselves because a CEO wants a headline. Whatever Victor was running on that stage, it wasn't restoration, it was theater. A shallow simulation, stitched together to look alive as long as the cameras were rolling. Even my old team seemed uncertain. Logan texted, "Did he actually fix it?" Priya sent only a question mark. My chest tightened. They wanted to believe. Who wouldn't? After days of chaos, a savior in a suit is easier to worship than the silence of truth. But illusions have lifespans. They always crack. I closed the laptop, letting the dark screen stare back at me, whispering what I already knew. This won't last 24 hours. The seed was planted. The collapse had already begun. 17 hours later, it was all confirmed. By 9:17 a.m., the entire platform collapsed again, harder, louder, uglier than before. No glitches, no stutters, just black screens across demo servers, client sandboxes, investor testbeds, and then the words appeared, gray and merciless. License authorization expired. I didn't need to be in the building to feel the chaos. Messages flew across my phone. A torrent of panic. Dylan. They can't access staging. Ops is screaming. Priya. Conference rooms locked down. He's losing it. Logan. It's everywhere. Not just a glitch. Total failure. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The open floor at Apex Nova's headquarters. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Engineers pounding keyboards until their fingers cramped. Curses echoing across the room. Directors pacing. Phones glued to ears. Assistants rushing papers nobody had time to read. And in the center of it all, Victor, collar soaked with sweat, shouting about sabotage, pointing fingers as if blame could be forced into a neat spreadsheet. I could almost hear Victor's voice, sharp and desperate, slicing through the tension of his own boardroom. This is external interference. Someone's undermining us. But no one was buying it anymore. Not after the headlines he had spun hours earlier, promising strength and stability. Not after they had clapped for his staged victory speech. The board wasn't seeing a savior. They were seeing a fraud unravel in real time. His carefully crafted veneer cracking under the weight of reality. Back at my apartment, I leaned against the kitchen table. Phone buzzing endlessly with updates. For the first time in weeks. The storm wasn't mine to carry. It was his. The collapse wasn't my shame, it was my vindication. I remembered the way he had smirked when he fired me. The way the board's silence had crushed me like a weight pressing down through the floor. And now, the silence was his. Thick, suffocating, stretching across the boardroom. Not loyalty. Not fear. Not respect, but suspicion. Because when systems fail twice in less than 2 days, people stop blaming glitches. They start looking for lies. One director finally said it aloud, according to Logan, who texted me mid-meeting. You misled us. This wasn't restoration. It was theater. I could almost see Victor's face drain. Hear the cracks in his voice as he tried to shout over the truth. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had grown into a forest. Investors were already pulling calls. Partners froze negotiations. The press circled like vultures, noses twitching at the scent of collapse. For the first time since the day of my firing, I exhaled without pain. The system was doing exactly what I designed it to do. Protect itself from hands that didn't belong. And I knew what would happen next. The phone calls, the frantic, desperate offers, the board scrambling to patch what they had broken. I whispered it to myself, voice steady as stone. They will come, not because they want me, because they have no choice. And when they do, I won't be asking, I'll be deciding. The second collapse wasn't just the system failing. It was the first crack in Victor's mask. Cracks spread, whispers travel faster than orders. By the third day, suspicion had seeped into every corner of Apex Nova. It crawled along hallways, into hushed phone calls, into the uneasy glances exchanged across the boardroom table. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. My old team kept feeding me fragments. Directors gathering in pairs after meetings. Doors snapping shut too quickly. Voices lowered to whispers. They weren't laughing at Victor's jokes anymore. They were questioning him. Were they just unlucky? Or had arrogance blinded him to warnings he could no longer ignore? And then came the call. Private number. Late evening. My apartment washed in the cold glow of my laptop. I answered. Silence stretching before a voice spoke. Low and careful. Ms. West, this is confidential. We need to understand. Is it true the contracts require your authorization? The question tightened something deep in my chest. I stared at the rain-smeared city lights beyond my window, tempted to lay every truth bare, to expose every lie Victor had fed them. But instinct held me back. Words can be twisted. Truth can be weaponized. So I gave them only this. Systems follow rules. People break them. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause I had ever known. A faint exhale. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down. Pulse steady. It wasn't confession. It was a seed. Enough to fracture the last threads of trust Victor clung to. Because whispers move faster than loyalty. By morning, those whispers would echo through the very room where he once smirked at my erasure. This time, the silence wouldn't protect him. It would consume him. They fired me in front of everyone. 6 years of work, erased in 6 seconds. No handshake, no thank you, just the sharp snap of a folder closing. And the silence that makes you feel smaller than air. My name hung there like an afterthought. Delivered without pause. I walked out not as the chief systems architect who had carried Apex Nova through blackouts, budget cuts, and sleepless nights, but as a line item deleted. A liability dismissed. What they didn't know was that silence doesn't always mean defeat. Sometimes it's just the sound of the ground shifting beneath their feet. 2 weeks later, while Victor strutted on stage promising the moon, the system froze. One line glowed across every screen. License authorization expired. I wasn't in that auditorium. But I didn't need to be. At home, I watched updates roll through Slack. My team's messages flickered with panic emojis. Half-broken jokes. Disbelief. Victor laughed nervously. Investors frowned. And then the truth cracked open. They had built their empire on my spine, and when they cut me out, the whole body collapsed. For the first time since the boardroom ambush, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. Days later, the board begged me back. Hour called. Polished voices dangling money like a bandage. But I had already learned. Power isn't in titles or paychecks. Power lives in the refusal to be bought. I stood before them, not asking for my job, not pleading for recognition. I told them plainly. I will not restore your access. The patent is mine. The choice is mine. And for the first time, they listened. Here's the truth I want you to carry. Success is not safety. It's not applause, promotions, or someone else's approval. Success is preparing so well, fighting so hard, and believing so deeply that even when they strip away your title, you still hold the keys. If you've ever been discarded, overlooked, underestimated, remember this. Your worth is not decided in their boardroom. It's written in what you choose to build next. And when the moment comes, don't shout, don't beg. Stand tall, whisper, thank you. And let the silence belong to you. Brielle was fired publicly from Apex Nova, erased in front of the board. But in silence, she still held the real power, the system, the licensing, the leverage. When CEO Victor tried to restore the system on stage, it collapsed again, just as Brielle had predicted. She didn't panic. She watched. The system protected itself, and the cracks in his empire widened. 2 weeks later, Apex Nova begged her to return, but Brielle refused. She didn't need the title or approval. She held the keys, and she knew it. True power comes from preparation, skill, and knowing your worth, not from applause or job titles. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, remember, your value isn't defined by anyone else. Own your knowledge, prepare relentlessly, and when the moment comes, don't beg, decide. Stand tall, stay silent, let the power be yours.